Thank you for choosing American Pest CEUs. Hi, I'm Sean Reeves. I'm an Associate Certified Entomologist with American Pest CEUs. I've been in the pest management industry since 1999, and I'll be your instructor for today's course. Today's course was compiled by Jack Launius, who has served in the pest management industry since 1990. Today's training is going to be on Chapter 8, Transportation, Storage, and Security, Keeping It Safe, and Chapter 9, Emergency or Incident Response, Be Prepared for the Worst. Alright, in today's study, we're going to start with Chapter 8. After studying this chapter, you should be able to state what precautions to take before transporting pesticides, summarize what the label says about legally disposing of unwanted pesticides, list the steps to take to restrict access to pesticides, explain how to create a safe and secure storage area. You should be able to describe how to properly store pesticides, discuss how to reduce the amount stored by controlling inventory, and explain how to maintain the integrity of pesticide containers. This chapter discusses safety and security issues that may arise when pesticides are moved or stored. Serious accidents involving pesticides are more likely to occur while they are in transit. Securing pesticides in a vehicle or in storage is a critical step to prevent vandalism or theft of the product. You can reduce pesticide transport and storage problems by being aware of conditions that lead to increased security risks. Transportation. Every pesticide applicator should understand the hazards of transporting pesticides and the procedures for minimizing those risks. Pesticides are moved by manufacturers to distributors, from retailers to end users, and from storage sites to job sites. Transportation-related accidents can happen at any point in the distribution chain from the manufacturer to the job site. With transportation, your first line of defense is recognizing how to prevent these transportation mishaps. When accidents occur, the timing of your response could determine the size of the spill. Let's talk about the transport vehicle. Transport vehicles should be in good mechanical condition. Make sure brakes, tires, and steering are all in proper working order. Repair all fluid leaks before putting a truck on the road or leaving the job site. Regularly inspect application equipment to be transported and used. Inspect hoses under pressure for wear and cracks and hose clamps for rust. Always carry supplies and replacement parts to make emergency repairs if a leak should develop while going to and from the job site. A couple things you definitely need to remember from this slide, those of you that are going to be out in the field and applicating with pesticides, you have to remember to inspect the vehicle regularly. You have to make sure the brakes are in good order, that the tires are good, and steering are good. If not, what's the chances you could have an accident? And if you've got bad brakes or something like that, and you slam into somebody, let's say you have a big tank in the back, like a 100 to 500 gallon tank, you've got a lot more weight in the back of that vehicle. So if those brakes aren't working correctly, it's going to take a lot longer to stop. And if you hit somebody, obviously it's going to be a bigger impact, and then we have a big potential for pesticides to go all over the road. Now you're going to need to regularly inspect application equipment to be transported and used. I would say this needs to be done daily. So if you're wondering how often should I look at this equipment? Daily. Especially hoses under pressure for wear and cracks and hose clamps for rust. If I could tell you the majority of the time that I see pesticide leaks, it's going to be these hoses under pressure that have cracks in them, or your hose clamps will get worn out and they'll get rusted, and then you're going to have leaks in those areas. Thinking more about the transport vehicle, never carry liquid pesticides in the passenger area because spilled chemicals may cause harmful fumes that can be inhaled. A pesticide spilled in the cab is difficult to remove and may lead to long-term inhalation exposure. Any of you that work in pesticide handling and use, make sure you never carry a product in a cab. Obviously, common sense tells you that, But if you carry a liquid pesticide in the passenger area of a vehicle and it turns over, you could be breathing harmful fumes, as we just talked about here. Also, a pesticide that's spilled in that cab is going to be difficult to remove and may lead to long-term inhalation exposure. So that pesticide doesn't just go away. It's spilled in that cab, it's in the carpet, whatever, it's been absorbed. You could have a major issue. So just make sure you never carry a pesticide in the passenger area. This is going to be on a ton of core exams, and it's just a good practice anyways for any of you handling pesticides. It is best to keep pesticide containers in the original shipping box. Depending on the material, many of these boxes meet the U.S. Department of Transportation, DOT, packaging standards to give added protection to the contents. Try to carry a minimum amount of pesticide products on a vehicle at any one time. Secure and protect pesticide containers against punctures and impacts from items packed closely together. Enclosed cargo boxes provide extra security from curious children, thieves, or vandals. Never stack pesticide containers higher than the sides of the vehicle. Make sure flatbed trucks have tie-down rings or racks to simplify the job of securing the load. Now, those of you that have been in the industry for a while would understand having a topper on the back of your truck is one of the best ways to protect pesticides and your equipment. This keeps it separate from the interior cab of the truck and also puts it under lock in the back where unwanted people can't get in there. The only issue you might have at that point is remembering to lock it up. I can't tell you how many technicians I know walk away from their truck and leave the side toppers up like this or leave it unlocked, and if we do that, we're really just defeating the purpose. Now in this case, we've got a steel tonneau cover on the back of the truck, so at least you can lock up pesticides. The biggest issue with something like this is your equipment probably won't fit very well, and you definitely don't want to turn sprayers over on their side because the chances of them leaking are pretty good at that point. So once again, I really like the topper for these type of things. I just think it's the only way to really keep your equipment safe. The one thing I can say about this truck is we had a pull-behind trailer behind it with a big termite rig, so we did have a locked enclosed trailer that we were able to use. That allowed us to just keep the pesticides in the back of the truck under this tonneau cover. Let's think about the vehicle operator. The person driving the vehicle and/or the owner of the company is accountable for injuries to people and any pesticide release into the environment. The vehicle operator or driver is the first person who can contain the spill and prevent it from spreading. By the time first responders arrive on the scene, the spill may already be contained. Therefore, it is important that the driver know basic emergency response procedures to contain the spill, company guidelines, and who will notify local, state, and federal authorities. Now, as you can imagine, every company should have a spill plan. You're probably wondering, what should be included in this plan? First, we need to talk about how to prevent spills, who to contact if there is a spill, how to contain the spill, how to clean up the spill, how often the plan will be updated. Noted that some drivers transporting pesticides regulated as hazardous materials will be required to follow DOT regulations regarding commercial driver's licenses, placarding, shipping papers, and annual inspections. Let's look at other safety precautions. Always carry product labels and safety data sheets, SDSs, when transporting pesticides on public roads or highways. The SDS contains critical information for the driver and emergency responders after a pesticide spill. It lists steps to safely deal with the spill, including the personal protective equipment (PPE) to use, whether the spill carries an inhalation or explosion risk, decontamination procedures, and emergency telephone numbers. Now, as an applicator, you're definitely going to need to know the 3 C's of pesticide spills, and this is going to be on a lot of core exams as well. Number 1, we need to control the spill. Number 2, we need to contain the spill. And number 3, we need to clean up the spill. These are going to be an integral part to any pesticide spill plan any company writes up. If you don't have the 3 C's in there, then you really don't have a good spill control plan. The pesticide spill plan should contain how to prevent spills, who to contact if there is a spill, how to contain the spill, how to clean up the spill, how often the plan will be updated. So this is going to be in addition to the 3 C's. You really need more training and education on preventing those spills, who to contact when there is a spill, and then of course how to contain and how to clean up, and how often the plan will be updated, because as we understand, we need to update these type of plans periodically from time to time, and this can be based on different changes in the law, as well as us changing the products we're using and what their toxicity rates may be. Let's look at some other safety precautions. Have the labels and SDSs well organized and alphabetically arranged by product name to allow quick access in the event of a spill. And I understand nowadays a lot of you guys are going to do this digitally. Either way, if you have a book of SDSs, or make sure you have a website or access to SDSs really quickly where you can pull them up, because when there's a spill, you don't have time to play games. You got to jump right on it, and you're going to need access to all these SDS sheets. Always carry a spill kit with the items you will need to handle a spill during transport. Inspect containers to ensure they have legible and attached labels, tight closures, and pesticide-free outside surfaces. Secure application equipment such as hand sprayers, backpack sprayers, and spreaders during transport. Protect pesticides from extreme temperatures and moisture during transit. Depending on the pesticide, either extremely low or extremely high temperatures can offer the stability of certain pesticide formulations. Now, when it comes to storing pesticides, you may see things on the label like store in a cool, dry place or keep out of extreme temperatures. What does this mean to you? Well, obviously, if you're going to store these pesticides, let's say off-site in a building, you're going to want to make sure it doesn't get extremely hot or cold in there. We're going to talk more about storage areas as we go, but also in the back of your vehicle. How many of you carry around pesticides in the back of your vehicle and leave them in there for day in, day out when it's really hot or really cold outside? Like if you're working in states up north, say Michigan, Minnesota, Maine, or even down into the Midwest, Northeast, you're going to get a lot of cold temperatures, right? So the reality is, if those pesticides are stored in your vehicle day in, day out, and you don't use them up pretty quickly, they're exposed to those really cold temperatures. Whereas in the same way, a lot of places in this country it gets really hot, especially in the summer. So if you're in Arizona, Texas, Florida, any of the southern states, or even the Midwest, again, or Northeast, it can get really hot in the summer. You have to remember, when it says store those products in a cool, dry place, the back of your vehicle is not going to work. It just doesn't work if you get those temperature extremes. It'll alter that product. It won't be as effective. And in the end, you're going to have problems controlling the insects you're working on. Let's talk about vehicle placards. DOT requires diamond-shaped signs called placards to be placed on vehicles that transport certain types and quantities of hazardous materials. Most distributors will give you any required placards to place on your transportation vehicle. A little more on vehicle placards. Hazardous materials include some pesticides, fertilizers such as anhydrous ammonia and ammonium nitrate, and fuels such as gasoline, diesel, and propane. Placards provide emergency responders with the information necessary to quickly assess an accident situation. Now, if you ship or transport materials in quantities that require placards, you must develop and implement a transportation security plan. In containers larger than 119 gallons, in quantities greater than 1,000 pounds. The security plan must include measures to prevent unauthorized access, a security check of employees who pick up and transport placarded hazardous materials, and the intended route of travel. In this section, we're going to talk about the storage of pesticides in buildings. Let's take a look at storage of pesticides in buildings. Although existing buildings are often used for pesticide storage, it is best to have a separate storage facility for pesticides, fertilizers, and other similar products. Storing pesticides separately gives emergency response crews more options in dealing with fires and spills. A well-designed pesticide storage site should do the following: limit access, permit better inventory control, protect people from exposure, reduce the chance of environmental contamination, prevent damage to pesticides from temperature extremes and excess moisture, safeguard pesticides from theft, vandalism, and unauthorized use, allow fire departments to know the location of products. Secure the site. Whether the designated storage area is a cabinet, an entire room, or a separate building, keep it locked when not in use. Post warning signs on doors and windows to alert others that pesticides are stored inside. Chemical storage containers come in many sizes and shapes. It is important the storage area is lockable, has proper signage, good lighting when necessary, a spill kit close by, labels, and SDS. It's also going to be very important to prevent water damage. Pesticide storage facilities should not be located in a flood zone. Carefully consider soil and land surface characteristics when selecting a storage site to prevent contamination of surface water or groundwater. Do not locate the storage facility near a stream likely to flood or where runoff water flows toward the facility. If flooding is likely, consider building dikes around the storage facility. And just so you know, this is a really big deal when building a pesticide storage facility. If you get a flood or you get water intrusion and those pesticides take off down a stream and get into the groundwater or surface water, you're going to have a really big issue on your hands. Make sure there's not a stream or other body of water that can flood in that area. If you're having issues with that, if you're not sure, look on somewhere like Google Maps or Google Earth and make sure what's around the surrounding area. Also, before you rent or buy a space, make sure you ask the people that owned it before or the people you're renting it from, is there a stream? Is there anything in this area that I need to be concerned about? Because we will be storing pesticides and we don't need any issues with water intrusion or flooding. Professionals to determine how best to protect the environment if high water were to enter the storage facility. Consider storing pesticides on a raised pallet or on shelves to prevent high water from damaging pesticide containers or flowing water from moving them off-site. Water or excess moisture may damage pesticide containers and their contents and cause metal containers to rust, paper and cardboard containers to split or crumble, pesticide labeling to peel, smear, or otherwise become unreadable, dry pesticides to clump, degrade, or dissolve, slow-release products to release their active ingredients. Now, I completely understand there's a lot on this slide. Keep in mind, pesticide storage areas are just really important in our industry. So you have to remember, when you put pesticides up on a raised pallet or on a shelf, this is going to help prevent that high water from damaging these containers or even flowing water from moving them off-site. Now, if you have a 500 or 1,000 year flood in an area where you've never had it before, is this going to be a reality? Probably not. You're probably going to have a problem no matter what you do. The goal is, if we raise them up some, the chances of them getting washed away are at least a little bit less. Now, obviously, as we talked about here, water or excess moisture may damage pesticide containers and their contents. And as we talked about here, metal containers are going to easily rust if they start getting wet. Paper and cardboard containers, like you have your granules in, even though they're inside plastic bags inside usually, they're going to split or crumble really easy. And if your pesticide labeling peels, smears, or otherwise becomes unreadable, we've got a whole nother issue, because then you've had a flood, Pesticides have been taken away off-site, and we don't even know what the products were or what the protocol is. Any dry pesticides, of course, if they get wet, they're going to clump, degrade, or dissolve, and they're just going to be completely useless. Also, we just mentioned at the end of this, any slow-release products that release their active ingredients, they're going to be an issue because they're going to float away, they're going to be taken downstream somewhere, and this is where we just have more and more issues with polluting either surface water or groundwater. Control the temperature. Choose a well-ventilated room where temperatures are controlled. Exhaust fans directed to the outside of the building reduce the buildup of noxious vapors from many of the solvents used in pesticide formulations. Ventilating the pesticide storage room into an adjoining room does little to solve the problem. Pesticide labeling often gives temperature limits for storing a product. Consider installing an exhaust fan on a timer to automatically turn on at a certain temperature. If the exhaust fan is not on a timer, turn on the fan switch before entering the storage room. Wait a few minutes to allow any vapors to clear. Another issue we need to think about is we need to provide adequate lighting. Be sure the pesticide storage facility is well lighted. Pesticide handlers entering the building must be able to read the product labels and determine whether containers are leaking. Obviously, as you can imagine, if you walk into a dark building where there's pesticides being stored, you're not going to have any way to know if they're leaking. And leaking is a very common thing. Now, those of you that do big lawn applications and turf, you would know this. You have your 50-gallon drums. They'll develop leaks over a period of time, and that leakage will get all up underneath there, and they'll even start to rust. But if the area is not well lit, you're going to have no idea this is going on, and by the time you do, you can have a big mess on your hands. So let's make sure that all of our pesticide storage areas are well lighted. Another thing of note is we're going to want to use non-porous materials. Use cement or other impervious materials for flooring to retain the spilled material on the surface. Such surfaces are easy to clean and decontaminate in the event of a release. A floor that slopes into a sump helps collect and contain the spill. Consider using shelving and pallets made of non-absorbent materials, such as plastic or metal, for the same reasons as impervious floors. I want you to think about this. You've seen things spilled on a concrete floor before, and you understand that floor itself is only going to absorb it to a point. It's not going to get down in and ingrained in that floor. You can clean an area like that up. But if you have a wood floor or some other type of surface that retains moisture, when you do have a pesticide spill, and it's inevitable at some point, there's going to be a leak or a spill in an area where you're storing pesticides, that area is going to absorb that pesticide. Wood is very porous, and as it does, you're never going to be able to get that pesticide out. It's going to be absorbed in there. You can't put a solution and scrub wood and ever get all those pesticides out. Now, when we talk about shelving and pallets, we do talk about plastic and metal here. I like plastic better. Metal rusts too quickly from moisture, even humidity. I really like plastic. Like you can see here with this plastic pallet, it's something that's great to store pesticides on. Even in the event that they leak or they get punctured or whatever happens, it's not going to absorb into that plastic. So we don't have to worry about something being destroyed and having to throw things out that have absorbed all those pesticides, as well as we don't have to worry about coming into contact with something that's absorbed all the pesticide and we can't get it out. You're always going to wear the PPE anyways. Doesn't matter if pesticide gets on plastic, metal, wood, or whatever the case may be. I'm just trying to tell you, we don't want any type of storage containers or materials that are going to absorb and retain those pesticides any more than they have to. Maintain the storage site. Store only pesticide containers, pesticide equipment, and a spill cleanup kit at the storage site. Keep food, drink, tobacco, feed, medication, medical or veterinary supplies, seed, treated and untreated, clothing, and PPE, other than that necessary for emergency response, out of the storage area. Once again, the reason why we're doing this, we don't want anything to get contaminated that could then expose people later. Another thing we need to do is keep labels legible. Store pesticide containers with the labels in plain sight. Costly errors may result if the wrong pesticide is chosen. Be sure labels are always legible. If the label is destroyed or damaged, immediately mark the container with some basic labeling information, such as the trade name, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency EPA registration number, signal word, and use classification. Go online to find a product replacement label or get a new label from the manufacturer. We need to remember to store pesticide containers safely. Store pesticides in their original containers or, if allowed by state law, in a properly labeled service container. Never use any other container to store a product. Besides being illegal, serious injury may result when using food containers, such as milk jugs or soft drink bottles. Children will associate the shape, size, and color of the container with its usual contents. Never use a pesticide product from an unmarked or unlabeled container unless you are certain what it is. Guessing wrong can cause serious damage at the application site. This is a great point, and this is on a lot of your core exams. You're always going to need to store pesticides in their original containers. Now, there can be some state laws that will allow you to store pesticides in a properly labeled service container, but typically you always want to keep them in their original containers. I would suggest if you're seeing that on core exams, you always make sure you follow that rule. Also, when we see containers that look like milk jugs or soft drink bottles or any type of container like that, never use those. Anybody, especially children, could think it's something you drink. This has happened through the years. There are stories out there where children have ingested pesticides because of these exact issues. In the event you do come across a pesticide in an unmarked or unlabeled container, you definitely don't want to use it. You may think you know exactly what it is. You may think, oh, I know what that is. That's Roundup, that's Termidor, whatever product you think it is. But the reality is you may guess wrong. If you see a pesticide in an unlabeled container, never use it and then find out who put it in there. And you're going to need to dispose of pesticides like that because keeping them in an unmarked container is just going to cause trouble down the road. Keep pesticide containers securely closed when not in use. Just like bag fertilizer, dry pesticide formulations can clump together under high humidity. Consider placing partially used bags of wettable and soluble powders, dry flowables, dust, and granules in sealable bags or airtight containers to reduce clumping. This is important. So we just talked about keeping pesticides in their original containers. Now some pesticides will come in like plastic baggies, and you have to keep in mind if you open these types of things up like granules in a plastic bag, you will then need to transport it to another container that seals correctly. Just keep in mind when you do this, you have to print the label offline and tape it on with some clear tape, or you're going to need to get a new label from the manufacturer. So this is one of those few cases where you would use a different container that's not the original container because you're getting a product that's in like a plastic baggie and there's no way to seal it up. I wouldn't suggest doing this with any liquid types of formulations, only the formulations we mentioned here on this slide. We're going to need to place drums and bags on plastic pallets. Store other pesticides on metal shelving, placing the heaviest containers on lower shelves. Do not allow containers to extend beyond the edge of the shelving. They could be knocked off or torn open. Place bulk and mini bulk tanks on a reinforced concrete pad. Diking around bulk tanks keeps leaking pesticides inside a contained area. Make the area inside a dike large enough to contain the volume of the liquid in the tank, plus at least an additional 10%. Keep valves and pumps as well as transfer hoses within the diked area when not in use. Contact your state, tribe, or territory pesticide regulatory agency for guidance on what constitutes bulk pesticides and to learn specific rules for building containment structures. Once again, there is the federal law on this, but remember, anytime we talk about it, you're going to need to contact your state, tribe, or territory pesticide regulatory agency on what constitutes those bulk pesticides, and you need to learn their specific rules for building containment structures, because this can vary by state, tribe, or territory. So anytime you see that, make sure you check with those overlays, because it's not just going to be by federal regulations at that point. We also need to look for damage. Regularly inspect pesticide containers to detect problems at the outset. If you find a damaged container, put on appropriate PPE and place it into a larger container, such as a 5-gallon bucket. Clean up spilled pesticide and place any contaminated materials in the bucket. If possible, use the pesticide immediately on a site and at a rate allowed by the label, or dispose of it according to label directions. Here's another important topic that I feel is really overlooked. We need to note the shelf life of all pesticides. Keep an inventory of all pesticides in storage, marking each container or box with the year it was purchased. In this way, you can use the oldest product first. Remember to use it as it was meant to be used. A replacement product may have different label directions and uses. If you have questions about the shelf life of a product, contact the dealer or manufacturer. Avoid storing large quantities of pesticides for long periods. Buy only as much as you need for the season. I think this is really important. You need to keep in mind it's great to have a practice of using the pesticides that are oldest first. I like the FIFO method, first in, first out. If I buy a pesticide, I put it in there, I make sure I label when it was bought, and I know as I go back into that storage area when each product was bought and which containers need to be used first. Now obviously if you've got them on a shelf, you could just put the new... Now obviously if you already have containers on a shelf, you could put the newest ones behind the oldest ones in front. But if you date them, it's even better, because that way you can look at the dates and know exactly what you're working with. We obviously only want to buy what we need as well. You don't want to buy a bunch of large quantities of pesticides that can go bad. And also, if you think about it, just for the finances of the company, why do you want a bunch of dead product that's got money out that you're not really making any money on anyway? We're going to need to follow these safety tips. For best results, have duplicate copies of pesticide labels and SDSs available in case of an emergency. Wear appropriate protective clothing when handling pesticide containers. Label items such as measuring utensils and protective equipment to prevent their use for other purposes. This is just a simple image of what we're talking about. Here we have a measuring cup that's used for pesticides only. You can see on the cup we put pesticide use only and poison at the top. Just remember, somebody could come across these things. Somebody could accidentally use them for something they're going to consume. I understand it's not likely, but it's always important to err on the side of caution and, of course, follow the label and the law. Follow these safety tips. For best results, have absorbent materials readily available to soak up leaks in the storage room. Keep a shovel, broom, and heavy-duty plastic bags on hand to remove the contaminated absorbent material. Check the SDS for materials that will deactivate a contaminated surface. When in doubt, contact the pesticide manufacturer for a recommendation. Have readily accessible clean water for decontamination, an eye wash station, personal protective equipment, a fire extinguisher rated for chemical fires, first aid equipment, and emergency telephone numbers. Additionally, keep plenty of soap, water, and paper towels available near the storage facility. There's some good points here on this slide, especially when it comes to running a pesticide business or for exam prep. You have to remember these are the things you're going to need accessible when you are storing pesticides. You're going to need clean water for decontamination, an eye wash station, personal protective equipment, a fire extinguisher rated for chemical fires, first aid equipment, and emergency telephone numbers. Once again, as we talked about at the end of the last slide as well, you're going to need plenty of soap, water, and paper towels available near the storage facility. I just want you to understand this because as you're running a business or working for a business or even taking core pesticide exams, questions about what should be inside these storage facilities a lot of times are on the exam, and for good reason, because these are the things you are going to need in that facility to keep yourself and others safe. Isolate unwanted or waste products. Do not accumulate outdated or unwanted pesticide products. Not only will you lose money by not using the product, but you may have to pay a disposal service. If you use the product up according to the label, you will avoid both problems. You 100% do not want to keep products on hand that are outdated or mixed products that haven't been used. First of all, they're not going to be stable that long anyways if you're keeping mixed products. But secondly, keeping these products around that are outdated, it's going to be a very bad thing for you. It's taking up shelf space. There's a chance somebody could use it anyways, not look at the date. But also, when you think about it, this is when companies tend to look for ways to get rid of a product incorrectly instead of following the label as we talked about here. So just make sure you get rid of products according to the label and don't keep products like these in your storage facilities. Sometimes EPA will cancel a product registration. When this occurs, EPA usually either allows the continued use of the product until it has cleared the distribution change, or issues a federal notice prohibiting use after a specific date. If you keep such products after that date, you may have to dispose of them as hazardous waste. Be sure to follow label directions for disposal of any excess or leftover product. If you are holding pesticides or emptied pesticide containers for disposal or recycling, keep them in a special section of the storage area. Some states sponsor pesticide disposal programs that collect unwanted pesticides from growers and applicators free or at a reduced cost. Contact your state, tribe, or territory pesticide regulatory agency to see if a program is available in your area. Let's talk about pesticide site security. Pesticide site security. Minimizing risk for the safety of employees, customers, and communities should always be a top priority when it comes to storing pesticides. Every pesticide storage facility should examine its security efforts and plan for worst-case scenarios. Routinely review your security measures to determine whether all risks have been accounted for in the plan. Without effective security procedures, you may be vulnerable to both internal, employee theft, and external, terrorism, theft, and vandalism threats. This puts both employees and the community at risk. I just want to say this when it comes to pesticide site security, you have to understand we have a big responsibility here. Always remember you need to routinely review your security measures to determine whether all risks have been accounted for in the plan. So any of you that are dealing with pesticide storage sites or seeing this on core exams, you have to routinely review your security measures. Benefits of security efforts. By developing a strong and workable security plan, managers, employees, and emergency responders can reduce the likelihood of theft or other mishaps. In addition, effective security avoids costly losses. An incident of any magnitude can seriously disrupt operations and result in lawsuits, costly remediation actions, employee fear and uncertainty, and damage to the company's reputation. A well-planned security program can safeguard employees and the community, maintain the integrity of operations, reduce insurance costs, prevent theft, reduce vandalism and sabotage, protect confidential business information, improve relationships with local authorities and community leaders. Risk assessment. The first step in developing a security program is to conduct a risk assessment of your business or firm's vulnerabilities. Make a list of assets that need protecting, possible threats, and steps that can be taken to protect them. Any place that stores or transports pesticides shares similar assets which are broadly defined as people, information, and property. People includes employees, visitors, customers, contractors, and neighbors. Information includes business, proprietary, and employee material deemed confidential. Property may include pesticide storage facilities, vehicles, application equipment, bulk storage tanks, mixing and loading sites, all utilities such as telephone, water, gas, and electric. Employee training and security awareness. Train employees to be vigilant in detecting security threats. Employees are familiar with what occurs in and around a pesticide storage facility or at the job site. They can provide an early warning when something seems out of place or someone is acting suspiciously. At a minimum, instruct all employees on pesticide inventory control, security of storage facilities and application equipment, and emergency preparedness and response. Evaluating pesticide security. Fundamental security tasks include secure buildings, manufacturing facilities, storage areas, and surrounding property. Prevent the unauthorized entry of persons into areas used to manufacture or store pesticides. Elements of an effective security plan may range from log sheets, identification badges, fencing, lighting, and locks to detection systems, cameras, and trained guards. Secure pesticide application equipment and vehicles. Keep unauthorized people away from equipment used for storing, mixing, loading, transferring, transporting, and applying pesticides. Secure and disable equipment in the field to prevent misuse. For example, do not leave keys in the ignition and lock doors and cabinets. Reclaim keys from employees when they terminate employment. Protect confidential information. As safety and security systems become more reliant on computers and other technology, it is important to secure them from hackers and intruders. Such efforts include contingency planning for power disruptions, adherence to password and backup procedures, and other measures to ensure that only authorized personnel have access. Develop procedures and policies that support security needs. Recommended practices include effective hiring and labor policies, inventory management, and planning for emergencies. Hiring and labor policies should include employee training, background checks, and workplace violence prevention. Inventory management is necessary to keep track of pesticides at the facility. Planning for emergency response is critical. It helps to ensure that managers and employees know how to respond in the unlikely event of pesticide release, bomb threat, or terrorist activity. Coordinate with authorities in a timely manner. If you believe a security breach or suspicious activity has occurred, contact local authorities immediately. In addition to alerting the police department, call the local emergency planning commission, fire departments, and other emergency response agencies. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, cautions that any suspicious activity related to the use, training, or acquisition of pesticides should be immediately reported to management and local authorities. Steps to prevent security problems. To minimize risk, adopt security measures to deter tampering with chemicals, equipment, or the facility itself. Include local authorities, e.g., police and firefighters, in developing the security plan. Keep an accurate inventory of all chemicals. Keep chemical storage areas locked when not in use. Update your emergency response plan and practice the procedures. Steps to prevent security problems. To minimize risk, post telephone numbers of law enforcement and emergency response agencies in a prominent location. Be cautious of unknown persons who want to pay cash for large quantities of pesticides. Ask employees to report any unusual incidents or requests. Restrict access of non-employees to your pesticide storage facilities. Summary: it is essential to establish safety and security practices for moving pesticides on the highways and at storage and job sites. Because spills and accidents are more likely to occur while transporting or applying pesticides, drivers and pesticide applicators must be trained to respond quickly to a spill. Pesticide labels and SDSs for the pesticide carried in the vehicle can provide important information in the event of a spill. Attention to pesticide site security and managing pesticides should be a top priority. Develop security and emergency management plans for every pesticide handling and storage facility to safeguard employees and the community. Design security plans to reduce the risk of theft, vandalism, and deliberate misuse of pesticides by those wanting to harm others. Train employees in security and emergency response procedures and to coordinate efforts with local police, emergency response personnel, and the FBI. After studying the next section, you should be able to discuss how pesticide releases from spills and fires can endanger humans and the environment, explain how to execute an emergency response plan, state how to dispose of contaminated materials resulting from a spill cleanup, discuss how to implement cleanup procedures to lessen the environmental impact from a spill, list the items to include for emergency response equipment, e.g., spill cleanup kit, first aid kit, and personal protective equipment. Although pesticide accidents and emergencies are rare, they do occur. Pesticides spilled on the ground or burning in a fire can contaminate water, soil, and air, damage plants, injure livestock, wildlife, or pets, and endanger the health of the applicator and emergency responders. Pesticide spills and fires may lead to financial loss due to cleanup, liability claims, and fines assessed by government agencies. Do all that you can to prevent accidents, but be prepared in case of emergency. Like a pesticide site security plan, a carefully thought out emergency response plan, i.e., a contingency plan, can help to prevent an emergency situation from becoming a catastrophe. An emergency response plan helps protect employees and the community, minimizes environmental damage, and reduces liability if an accident happens. Emergencies can take many forms: tornado or high winds, flood, fire, or a highway accident. How you and emergency personnel respond determines whether the problem is quickly and safely resolved. Follow these guidelines when developing an emergency response plan. Designate an emergency coordinator as the go-to person. This person must have authority to make important decisions during an emergency, including coordinating with local first responders, such as fire, police, and paramedics. The emergency coordinator is the person who will make the necessary calls and fill out reports to government agencies. Post in the office, shop, and truck a list of names and telephone numbers of response agencies that may require notification. We need to prepare a plan, fill in form, or an outline of critical information to convey to emergency personnel. Keep it with your calling list. Be sure to include the following: name of the person reporting the incident, precise location of the incident, general description of what happened, the exact name, quantity, and classification of pesticides involved, the extent of injuries. We're also going to need to prepare a plan. We need to know whether pesticides have entered surface water, facility map that shows a layout of all chemical storage buildings and bulk storage tanks, access roads, main shutoffs for electricity, water and gas, perimeter fencing or gates, fuel storage tanks, the location of fire alarms, fire extinguishers, and other firefighting equipment, and protective clothing, and drainage ditches, wells, and surface flow of water. We also need an area map that shows your facility in relation to the surrounding area. Provide emergency response agencies with an updated copy of the facility map and an area map whenever changes are made. So what are some of the things we need to keep? A product inventory of chemicals stored at the facility. Let your emergency response plan reflect peak seasonal storage of pesticides, fertilizers, and fuel. You need to keep copies of pesticide labels and safety data sheets, SDSs, away from the storage area. Maintain in good working order the emergency equipment and supplies needed to respond to fires and spills. In the current image, you're seeing a great map of a chemical storage area. What we're looking at here would be something similar to like a lawn and ornamental or pest control operation where they have offices over on the right side. They've got a little showroom or whatever the case may be, as you can see here on the diagram, but it's also showing you in the back where they've got chemical storage areas. When you look at a map like this, you're always going to want to look at the key. So when we look at this map, we can see we have a key to facilities. What you're seeing in that key is codes for different things on the map. For instance, when we look at our map again under the key to facilities, the first code is S for stream. As you can see looking at the map, we have the warehouse, we have the building, we have the offices, but at the bottom, at the far end of the parking lot, we've got S for stream. So this is letting us know that there's a stream in the area. This is very important to you as a pesticide storage company and for first responders to understand this stream is in the area. In the event there is a spill or something like that, we know this is something we have to be very aware of. I just really like maps like this that are really well laid out, that gives a full overview for everybody in the company to be able to follow, as well as, like we said, emergency responders or hazmat teams. They know exactly what to do, what to look at based on the map, and what they need to do to help contain or control that spill, and what environmental impacts they need to be worried about in the process. Fires. Pesticide products vary significantly in their flammability. However, any pesticide product involved in a fire is dangerous to responders working at the scene because of smoke and fumes. Even after the fire has been extinguished, pesticide residue in the debris, soil, and runoff may be dangerous. Precautions to reduce fire hazards. Follow these guidelines to help you prepare for and respond to a fire in the storage area. Store combustible pesticides away from heating sources. Install a fire detection system. Train employees to use a fire extinguisher. Prompt action is essential when a fire occurs. Coordinate all details on managing a fire with local emergency response officials. Take the following actions. Make sure employees evacuating the premises go to a designated rendezvous point where everyone can be accounted for. Notify the fire department. Provide emergency response teams with SDSs, labels, the emergency plan, and a site map. Follow the instructions given by the on-site incident commander. Prompt action is essential when a fire occurs. Coordinate all details on managing a fire with local emergency response officials. Take the following actions. Establish a security perimeter to discourage onlookers. Contain contaminated runoff water and leaking pesticide on site by building berms. Consult with emergency responders to decide whether to allow the fire to burn out. Call your insurance agent. Make all regulatory phone calls required by state and federal agencies. And those of you that are going to be storing pesticides and again taking these core exams, just remember when things like a fire occurs in an area storing pesticides. Once again, you need to establish that security perimeter to discourage onlookers. The last thing we need is people gawking and breathing in the burning pesticides. Also, we need to contain contaminated runoff water and leaking pesticide by building a berm. So this is basically just taking a shovel, taking some dirt and building a berm to stop that pesticide from going into runoff water or any area like that it's going to. Obviously, we need to consult emergency responders to decide whether to allow the fire to burn out. You never know what they're going to say. This is going to be based on the labels, but put this in the hands of the emergency responders. Get them the labels, make sure they understand what we're dealing with, and let them decide if the fire needs to burn out. Always contact your insurance agent because they're going to need to know that there's been an issue, there's been a fire, and then you can start documenting from there. Last and not least, we need to make the regulatory phone calls required by state and federal agencies. Each state's a little bit different, but when it comes to federal agencies, you have a lot of the same protocols. Make sure you understand what the federal and state protocols are if there's a pesticide fire, and that you make those calls and you're not out of compliance in that area. We need to control the spill. Act immediately to control the spilled product. Always put on the appropriate personal protective equipment, PPE, before responding to a spill. Place small, leaking containers into larger ones. If a larger container, such as a drum, is leaking, try to plug the leak. Then transfer the contents to another container. To stop leaks from pressurized systems such as sprayers, turn off the pump. Never leave the site unattended. Contain the spill. Do all you can to keep the spill from spreading or getting worse. Prevent the material from entering surface water. Use a shovel. You can quickly berm off an area to keep the spilled pesticide out of drains and waterways. A spill that is contained on the surface is much easier to clean than one that has entered a body of water. If the spilled pesticide does contaminate a stream, pond, or other waterway, immediately contact the state, tribe, or territory regulatory agencies responsible for streams and fisheries and for pesticides. Do not delay notifying the authorities. They need time to alert downstream users who draw surface water for drinking, prevent accidental poisoning of livestock, evacuate people using the water for recreation purposes such as swimming and fishing, and avoid contamination of irrigated crops. Call the manufacturer's emergency number on the SDS to find out what steps you or the emergency response coordinator should take to lessen the dangers of water contamination. Call 911 to report the spill and be ready to respond to the authorities arriving at the scene. Be sure to have the product label and SDS available for emergency responders. After the spill has been contained, follow your emergency plan. In some cases, the applicator will call the emergency responder, who will then call the proper authorities. Clean up the spill. The last step at the spill site is to clean up the spilled product. Sweep up any absorbent materials and other contaminated items and place them in a drum. If the spill occurred on concrete or asphalt, you will have to neutralize the surface. Follow the instructions on the SDS or contact the manufacturer, whose number is listed on the data sheet. The state, tribe, or territory regulatory agency involved with pesticide spills will tell you what to do when the spill occurs on soil. For example, they may require that the top 2 to 3 inches of soil be excavated, removed, and replaced with clean soil. Clean up the spill. Keep records of your activities and conversations with regulatory authorities, emergency responders, news media, and the public when dealing with a pesticide spill. Photographs help document any related damage, as well as steps you have taken to clean up the spilled product. Always take photos at the site. Anytime there's a spill, take photos, because those photos are priceless in the future to help you when it comes to legal issues and dealing with any types of lawsuits or anything like that. You definitely are going to want to have good photos of when you clean up a spill. Prevent spills. A key to reducing the likelihood of any spill is to properly maintain your application equipment and transport vehicles. Leaks and drips from cracked hoses or loose hose clamps clearly indicate problems. Defensive driving techniques and refraining from cell phone use while driving are two important habits that can prevent vehicle accidents that might result in a spill. Keep a spill cleanup kit in each pesticide transport vehicle and at the site where pesticides are mixed, loaded, and stored. Store your spill kit items in a plastic container and keep them clean and in working order. Include the following items in a spill response kit: telephone numbers for emergency assistance, PPE designed for use with pesticides, absorbent materials such as spill pillows, absorbent clay, and cat litter, a shovel, broom, and dustpan, heavy-duty detergent. Summary: prepare for a pesticide emergency. Make sure the plan includes designating an emergency response coordinator, maintaining a list of emergency response agencies, preparing a map of the facility, and keeping a product inventory. Be sure all employees at the facility are familiar with the emergency response plan and know what to do in a crisis. Take precautions to reduce the chance of pesticide fires. The best way to manage pesticide spills is to prevent them from happening. It is your responsibility as a pesticide applicator to do everything possible to avoid spills and adhere to a few basic guidelines when handling spills and leaks. Accidents happen. Be prepared so they will not become catastrophes. Congratulations, you have completed the course. Please proceed to the exam to receive your credit.